there, and welcome to a new episode of Frank About Health. If you are in London, it is now 10 p.m. While it is here in New York City, 5 p.m. The reason why I brought the time difference is because today our guest is from Wales and actually is here through our conscious consultant, Sam Leibowitz, who gave me an interesting introduction about my special guest today, Alison, who is going to talk about a unique illness and how she was able to use her experience to actually not only treat it, but transform her life into a much better perspective than she could have ever imagined. That's why this particular episode has been subtitled Resilience and Transformational Coaching. But what we're not talking about just resilience from trauma. We're talking about taking a life experience that's been riddled with illness and pathology and being able to turn it into a life filled with purpose and a life that with the new direction can also help others suffering from the same illness. The illness in this particular case is fibromyalgia, and in some cases it's also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. But before we go into further discussion about the way that our guest today has been able to use the illness to transform her healing, I just want to give a little bit of background in terms of why this guest is important. As anyone who's been watching Frank About Health over the last year, you have seen myself and my co-host, Phyllis Quinlan, talk about a lot of issues related to various medical issues that we've all gone through. COVID-19, diabetes, cancer. Everyone knows that I was talking about epilepsy when I started the show. The point is even though we all have our providers and our medicines and our treatment plans, we also have to remember that we have ourselves. And we have to continue to advocate for ourselves to live the best quality of life possible. So I'm hoping that this particular episode is going to give you a template or a framework that regardless of what condition you are suffering from, you will be able to take the bull by the horns and collaborate with all the necessary support systems you have to continue to live the best life that you can. So on that note, Alison, welcome to Frank About Health.
Hey, thank you, Frank, so much, and Phyllis. I'm so excited to be here and chatting with you tonight. Thank you. Even at 10 o'clock.
Exactly. Yeah. Actually, we had a show with a doctor from Switzerland about 3 months ago. So I think it was later than where you are now, but still, it was worth it, the whole experience.
Yeah, no, I'm very, very excited to be here. Thank you.
You're so welcome. I'd like you to start by telling the listeners and viewers exactly what your condition is, or was, or how you're living with it, and pretty much share your story.
Okay, so, well, it was, which I love saying that word, it was something called, two things. So ME in the UK, it's more known as ME, and in the States and Australia and other places, it's more known as CFS. So ME stroke CFS, but also fibromyalgia. So two different things. And when I was 17 years old, I became ill. I'd had a flu virus, which was pretty significant. And then after that, I'd had a very bad reaction to smoking some cannabis for the first time, which I just tried it once and I was incredibly ill. And I believe now that my body just shut down from that. It was obviously laced with something. I had a very unfortunate experience, shall we say. And very long story short, and as I said to you guys, this is a much longer version on my website if people do want to find out more about this. But my body just went into a massive shutdown, and literally overnight in the February of my 17th year, I was pulled out of school, was just unbelievably unwell. We didn't know what was wrong with me. My darling mum and father would sit with me in the doctor's surgery saying, this girl is not depressed. This isn't what this is about. So I'd wanted to be a rock climbing instructor, and when I was 16, that was my goal. I was going to move to Canada, be a rock climbing instructor and live in the mountains, kayaking and doing all those things. And suddenly I was out of school in my A-level year. I didn't go back for 9 months, but over the course of that year, I was incredibly ill. So chronic pain throughout my body. I became agoraphobic at that time as well, which I think was just kind of a knock-on effect of the shock of it all. And we just didn't know what was wrong with me. It was literally overnight. And it sounds very dramatic, but it was. 1 minute I was very healthy, happy teenager. The next minute I was completely a whole different girl. And it was 2 years later before I got the diagnosis. And with things like ME, CFS, fibromyalgia, especially at that time, there was no test that showed anything in the blood. So you would just get tested for everything. And if all those results came back positive, which they would do for me, but you had all these different symptoms, so the chronic bone, joint, muscular pain, the cognitive struggles, the extreme fatigue. And when I say extreme, I mean like you make a cup of tea and you feel like you climbed a mountain. And I now know what it's like to climb a mountain, but extreme fatigue, you would then get this diagnosis of that. So that gave me, it was kind of a relief to have some sort of diagnosis. But I think from what I know now as well, it was at a very strong label. And then, yeah, for the next 24 years, I had periods of time where I was well enough to do certain things, but I was always, and I mean always, in chronic pain of some kind to some level. But I had periods of time, so I had an 8-year relapse in my late 20s to early 30s where I was bedbound pretty much for that whole period, or in a wheelchair if I was to go anywhere. And then the other major relapse was in 2012, which was a 4-year relapse where I was pretty much, again, bedbound. I was living in my own place by that point, and in a dark room. I had friends, family coming, bringing food. They'd have to just put it by my bed. I can remember very well, my mum sitting by my bed talking very quietly and then having to leave. They'd wash up and go just to get me through that time. So that was the kind of, again, in a nutshell, the years of illness. So while I did do things at times, I could never sustain it. I'd always relapse. And again, I mean, always. there was no two ways around it. So yeah, that was the years of the illness. But my transformational journey, sorry, go on, Frank, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, you obviously were going to the doctor and taking a whole regimen of, I guess, medications and other kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So many different medications over the years. Obviously painkillers. I mean, there was times when I was on morphine. I can remember that very clearly, and Valium at times because the pain was so extreme. So you guys know what it's like to have flu, and you get that very painful skin where your skin. I mean, I remember not being able to brush my hair or touch my hair. It was so painful, and I can remember a period of time in that 8-year relapse where I was literally living on ice cubes because the nerve endings inside my mouth were so raw that eating food was, I'd eat ice cream. I would have to eat food, but it was incredibly painful. And so that was everywhere. And I can remember even when the times when I could function and do something, I remember being out walking one day. And when I say walking, I mean just a walk, like a little walk, but the breeze on my skin still burned. I remember being like, oh my God, I'm actually able to do this, but I've still got that. So lots of medications over the years, many of them just, really made me feel worse because of the side effects, and you'd get that build up of medication in your system. So that toxicity as well, which added to the toxic feeling that I was already living with. Alternative therapies. I mean, this is my experience, and obviously there are a lot of people out there with similar chronic health struggles where alternative therapies will have helped, but my experience was nothing touched it. And I had Reiki, reflexology, American Native Indian healing, nutritional, Chinese medical doctor on Harley Street, everything that I could access at that time. And I don't remember one thing even making any difference to the journey. So yeah.
You did say though that there was a breakthrough at some point.
Well, that was until I discovered NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So that was at a point in 2016. And as I was telling you guys recently, I just very clearly remember a particular day where in my brain I heard myself say, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I am kind of not like I'm not going to live my life anymore, but I don't even know what that was, but it was like, I am done. And I remember a friend putting his recovery with a similar illness down, same illness down to reflexology. So I called him immediately and he said, yeah, but they've moved away now. And I remember my heart sinking, thinking, oh, so close. And he said, but it wasn't just that. It was this NLP process course that he'd gone on. And I was like, that's the thing which I'd heard about over the years, but just never done it for whatever reason. Obviously, I wish now, but you can't, it was what it was. I rang a practitioner literally immediately. And I discovered over the course of that year what neuroplasticity meant by developing a mindfulness practice over that year, where because I've been in bed pretty much in the dark, mostly for 4 years, because I couldn't tolerate light, my mind had gone out of control, because I couldn't just go for a run and sort of sweat off the little things in life. They became demons and monsters in my mind. Right. Where I'd be ringing my mum at night crying over things that now wouldn't even factor in my mind, So over a course of a year of with audiobooks of Eckhart Tolle and Thich Nhat Hanh, practicing their sort of ways of approaching mindfulness and developing my own practice, all of that crazy had quietened down to nothing. And I discovered through YouTube the word neuroplasticity. And I was like, oh, that's what I've done. And when I spoke to the practitioner, she said, do you know what neuroplasticity is? And I said, I'm in. I'm there. I don't need to know anything else. I'm on that course. And I went on that course and I got goosebumps just even saying it. But I remember it so clearly, being in bed just saying, I'm in. And she laughed. So yeah, went on the course. I was taken in a wheelchair, but from the first day of being in that course, I was never in a wheelchair again. I had sunglasses on, I was under a little blanket, and I was sat on a sofa and just did what I was told with this particular NLP technique. Yeah. And from that first day, that was it. And over the course of a year-ish of diligently rewiring the structure of my brain, and I know we'll talk a bit more about this, but it was from the very first day there were shifts. And when I look back, they were small shifts, but at that time they were monumental shifts. They were things that I was like, this has never happened. This isn't in line with my story of chronic health. Like, this isn't what I've experienced for 24 years. And you know that very well when it's that kind of illness for that long. Yeah. And just every day those shifts got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I, over the course of that year, I was doing things I never dreamed of. But I think it was about, 9-10 months, a year before I felt ready to fly the nest and go off and live my life. And I was 41 years old at the time, and I was ready to go off and figure out who I was as a human and explore the world. And coaching was really just waiting for me to go off and do that until this last year, where it's like, right, come on, now it's time for you to coach and start sharing that story and putting it out there and helping other people figure out, as I say, what their version is of that wheelchair. Right. So it doesn't have to be a chronic health condition. It could be their life's great, but there's something that's blocking their life from moving forward in some way. I work with people where their life is in a really good place, but they just want to take it to the level. But then it's also obviously people with chronic health conditions, and it's just the stuff that's blocking them living, which for me was
we're about to have our first break, but you pretty much wrapped up your entire evolution, I guess, from illness, diagnosis to breakthrough. And so it leaves room for us, when we return from our break, to really talk about what seems to have been your personal journey or remedy towards your new journey, which is NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And so when we return right here on this episode of Frank About Health, we will pick up where we left off by really featuring in the next section about NLP, how it works, what helps or anchors the other, get Phyllis's view on it, especially from the medical perspective. And everyone who has any questions about it during the hour, by all means, please write to frankabout.health102@gmail.com. Or if you're watching live on Facebook, add something in the comment section and we can get back to you either during or after the show, right here on TalkRadio.NYC and Facebook Live, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, and welcome back as we're talking here with Alison Petty and Phyllis Quinlan about neuro-linguistic programming. Now, I'd like to see both yours and Phyllis's perspective on NLP, especially when you look at the conditions of fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME as they call it in the UK, or even how you were able to use it as a remedy of sorts, or as a way of being able to have more mindfulness over your treatment. I would start by a question, which is NLP the issue of language itself, or is it the issue of changing your pathways, or does the language change them for you?
Should I answer that?
Yes, please, Alison.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so, well, very briefly, NLP was created in the 70s by John Grinder and Richard Bandler. And I was thinking earlier, it's very much known in the business world, NLP. You know, when I network, people are like, oh my God, I know about this for business, but I had no idea it could have this effect on chronic health or mental health conditions. So it's very much about the structure of our experience. That's kind of what they talk about, how we have these structures of our life experiences. So something will happen, maybe it's a really great experience in our life, or it could be a traumatic experience. Like for me, it was, you know, very traumatic reaction to the cannabis, and I was also had a virus at the time, so my immune system was already compromised. But it created this structure, and when I look back now, everything I've learned in the last 5 years and from my studying and my relentless love of everything to do with neuroplasticity in the brain, is that my brain, that structure that was a very healthy 16-year-old that wanted to be a rock climber, fused into a mess of, you know, chronic illness. And then it stayed like that, and then I carried on living. I often liken it to like scaffolding. So like, you know, having this sort of scaffolding that was built around me, and I just carried on living. My house was built with a scaffolding around it for 24 years until I went on this course and was enabled by this particular process, which is NLP based. And it's got, you know, like self-coaching and hypnotherapy involved as well, and visualization, very much about harnessing all of those things, but to create this new scaffolding, this new structure that was, you know, language is, it's one of my favorite things to talk about. You know, Frank, you and I have talked about language already in our own discussions, and very much about creating a new dialogue, a new story. And I can remember when I went on this course, I mean, I don't think I told you this, Frank, but in 2000, I started a website for ME from bed. I was in a relapse. So I was in a relapse from 2000 to 2008. And in that time, in 2000, I started a website before Facebook. I built a chat room and a forum, and it became an international organization. So I was advocating for this illness for many years. But even that compounded my own story, my own narrative of I have ME, I have fibromyalgia, I am chronically ill, I am blah, blah, blah. So yeah, very much the power of that language. Yeah, that was my, you know, that was absolutely life-changing for me. When I learned, we went on the course, we said, hi, I'm Alison, I'm here because I've had ME for 24 years, whatever that was that I said. That was the last time I talked about it, because everything from that point on, and Phyllis, you'll know this from coaching as well, you know, you talk to the client about what's going on with them, but you don't want to stay in that space. It's like, okay, I have enough information now to know what we're going to start working with, and we might dip back into your past at some points, but now it's about turning you in a different direction and starting to create what I call, you know, for me, it's like a roadmap for your brain. And that roadmap is a very different structure, and it's built on the language, it's built on the body language, it's what's the visualizations, you know, what we're holding in our mind. It's all those things that create that map that our brain can then go, right, we're now going in this direction. Yeah. And that's where the programming comes in from NLP. So you've got neuro, which is your neurons, your billions of neurons. Linguistic is language. Programming is your
rewiring.
Exactly.
Rewiring. And rewiring. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I agree with you, Alison. The power of language, we're just really starting to understand the power around that. And it is something we do focus on in coaching. You know, a lot of times I will work with people and they'll say to me, I'm anxious. And I will say, you're feeling anxious. No, I'm really anxious. I understand that, but you're feeling anxious. In other words, you're not the feeling, you know, and the power of having somebody, you know, have insight into they are not their feelings, they're experiencing their feelings, and be able to step back from that so that you can look at the feeling in a much more empowering way that you're not at the mercy of. Now, that's just really to talk about the power of language. That's not neuroplasticity or neurolinguistics, but I'm really, well, the first thing I want to say is just how your story has affected me. I'm in awe and wonder. I truly am. I can't imagine being bedbound for the length of time that you were, with the setbacks that you had, and, you know, now coming out and literally teaching rock climbing, you know. And I look at your LinkedIn page, and I encourage all our listeners to connect with Alison on LinkedIn and of course her website. But, you know, when we I think it's Brene Brown who talks about true healing or true resolution of bereavement, where, we know the 5 steps Dr. Kubler-Ross gave us. But really, when you're able to take your life experience and see it as wisdom and then help teach others and share that wisdom and insight with others for the idea of hopefully influencing their life for the positive as well, that's true resolution. You've now taken something from denial or anger,
Right.
all the way through to being shared and empowerment. And the strength of your character, the courage that you've shared, during all of this, it's incredible. I can't imagine persisting and living with a sense of there's got to be an answer somewhere for all of these years, especially when you were so young and obviously so vital, and having your life taken away from you so suddenly. It's really a real testament. So I just want to say to who's ever listening who's suffering from fibromyalgia, clearly there is hope. Clearly there are options out there that perhaps Western medicine has not necessarily done enough studying about, or is only starting to scratch the surface of, that clearly we need to start being far more curious about in order to be able to do the exploration necessary to serve patients who are underserved in this way, simply because we don't truly understand it.
I guess on that note, is fibromyalgia considered a physiological disease or a neurological disease with physiological symptoms? Because I don't know how to classify fibromyalgia versus epilepsy, for example.
So my understanding is that there is a triggering event, and Alison has shared that, it might have been a bad experience with some cannabis, or more than likely, I think it was more the virus, because I hear an awful lot of fibromyalgia secondary to some sort of viral infection. And the way I'm understanding it is that this triggering event creates a hyper signaling between the spinal cord and the brain, so that there is a hyper activity to pain receptors and or sensations, so that you're hypersensitive to touch. Maybe you can't wear clothes, or maybe you can only wear certain kinds of clothing. There's a hypersensitivity to light. There's a hypersensitivity, of course, pain, numbness, restless leg, things of that nature. And we're not quite sure what causes this hypersensitivity. That's my understanding of the fibromyalgia. All right.
So
But again, my understanding is more Western than anything else. What I love is the ability to create different neuro pathways to either go around this short circuiting or this hypersensitivity, and to create a different experience for yourself.
Right.
So,
and I guess, yes, Alison, were you about to talk about the neural pathways?
Well, I was just going to add on to that from what I've learned since. So the process that I did that got me out of the wheelchair was created by, or designed by, Dr. Phil Parker about 20 years ago, I think now. And he designed it. He was a chiropractor at the time, starting to work as a coach and in NLP. And he started to hit on things that work with people with ME and started to, have really positive effect. And then he created this process, which is what I did. It's called the lightning process. I'm now studying with him. I'm doing all the qualifications through his institute, and I'm actually being taught by the guy who created the thing that got me out of the wheelchair. So I'm always saying thank you.
That is nice.
He hears that a lot from people around the world, though. But my understanding now is what I did with that particular course was switch off the fight or flight response that I've been in for 24 years. So we know that in the history of with our prehistoric ancestors, the fight or flight was very important to save us from getting eaten by the bear. But then that fight or flight would switch off, that release of adrenaline hormones that gets us ready to either run or fight. But in modern society, we know that most of us are in some kind of constant state of fight or flight to different degrees. And again, looking back now, I'm like, okay. So when I had the virus and then the cannabis, and I think my body went into this, I cannot even describe the biggest panic attack one could have. Yeah. But then I was in this state of fight or flight for years and years and years, and that constant release of those those hormones causes something that's called the allostatic load, which again, there's more about this on my website, explaining it more in detail.
Right.
And that's what causes the chronic health condition. So when I did this course, it's very much designed to switch off that fight or flight and also create this new structure of a new experience that you design using your language and your positive intention of what you want to have in your life instead of what you've currently got. But when you switch that off, now when I look back at that year from when I did it, where it just went like this over the course of a year, my body was able to heal because that allostatic load was reduced and my body was able to heal underneath it, and that physiology of me found its feet again, that 16-year-old self again.
Yeah.
And that's just to add on to what Phyllis was saying there as well. Yeah. I know we're going to go into a break in just a moment, but you're absolutely correct. We are neurobiologically wired. Something stimulates our brainstem. It goes through our limbic system, which means we feel it before we actually get to the cognitive center. So
Right.
something's a stimulus, you feel it, and then you think, which is why so many people keep saying, I have to think before I speak. What's actually happening is you're being triggered to speak by your feelings, and then you say something. Even just growing your own emotional intelligence around self-management, you can develop plasticity around inserting a positive thought or a different choice between feeling something and doing something, so that you can actually make a difference or make a different choice about what you're going to think or
Right.
say or do that would be different. If you don't do that, you're going to have some kind of regret in the next 15 minutes. But if you do that, then you are showcasing yourself in a more authentic way that you want to be seen by the world. I know we're going to break, Frank.
Well, no, I mean, this is perfect segue because now in segment 3, which will begin after the commercial break, we want to learn more exactly about Alison's coaching, the techniques, give probably some examples of how anything from pain, chronic pain, to bereavement, loss of a loved one, maybe even just, phobias or trying to get over anxiety over circumstances. These are the things that I'm sure all of the listeners and viewers are looking to learn more about. By the way, Alison's website is alisonpetty.com, and you'll learn more about her site and her practice and her coaching when we return right here on this episode of Frank About Health, both on TalkRadio.NYC and Facebook Live, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to Frank About Health. Today we're talking with Alison Petty about resilience and transformational coaching, as we just learned about her experience with fibromyalgia, as well as experiences with neuro-linguistic programming. She has been able to already carve a niche for herself right there in London, in Wales, but I'm sure you're going to go global with your website and among other kinds of training you're going through. So I guess I'd like to learn, or both Phyllis and I would like to learn, tell me about your coaching practice and are you being certified in the near future, or what is it you want to do to go further with your practice?
Okay, so yeah, well, I am officially coach already. That's something that I've already been doing. I'm very, well, I can't remember who said it. Somebody said the word purpose earlier, and I was like, yes, that for me, it's purpose. I've learned what that is. I've known what passions are. Rock climbing is a passion, but this is purpose for me. And it is that thing of using that history again, as you said earlier, Phyllis. That's to me, it's like, having those 24 years was one thing, and if I'd just gone on and carried on rock climbing and having a different life, great, I've moved on. But for me, actually, now being able to use those 24 years to help other people is really is everything. It's like full circle kind of thing. So so I work with clients. I don't particularly have particular type of person I work with. It's mostly people that resonate with my story, or obviously myself, but resonate with the story of transformation in some way. So work with people from all walks of life, and I always say it is about helping people figure out what their version is of that wheelchair. And my hope is that it's not a story that's as dramatic as mine, but I actually had a lady crying on me in a good way the other day because I was telling her the story. We were having a networking meeting, and she was crying because a friend of hers has a very similar story to mine. And she says, I have to tell her. I have no idea this is possible. It was really powerful. It's like, this is why I'm doing this now, because, if I'd heard this, I like to think I'd have gone, tell me, talk to me more about this. So working with people with chronic health conditions, not just fibromyalgia, all kinds of different things, sleep issues, anxiety, depression, it's always, well, it usually comes down to some sort of confidence issue when it comes to sort of anxiety, things like that. That usually is what's underlying it. So working with confidence in people and self-worth is a
Right.
biggie as well. And I often, with clients, I'm listening to them and I'm thinking, if you knew your worth, you would not, all this stuff. And I can say that for myself as well, many times in my life. If I knew my worth, there wouldn't be all this going on if I just knew that. So, but I also work with people where life is actually in a really good place and they just want to perform even better. And that's where NLP can
Right.
be really powerful, kind of where it originated from.
Yes.
Working with, a principal of a sixth form multi-academy trust who, his life's in a very good place, but for him, it's about just any sort of limiting beliefs that are just stopping him from performing to that extra level so that he can run that college to the best of his ability and then have that trickle down knock-on effect to his teachers and his staff and his board, but his pupils,
Right.
because again, we're going to be working a huge amount with language through our time working together so that he can, really set that tone and lead rather than manage. So yeah, I mean, I'm just very, very passionate about it. I could talk about it all day.
But
but
no, that I guess it's interesting then. So you can have someone who probably has a pretty well-adjusted life at the
yeah.
moment, but maybe has a bout of confidence issues and about to make a public presentation, let's say,
Oh,
or maybe
absolutely.
they're afraid of flying, especially after a
Yeah.
time that we've had with
Yeah.
COVID. So that person may only need the language component of the coaching that you're doing.
Definitely. I mean, the fear around presentations is quite a common one, or some kind of like speaking thing. And that's quite regular. And I had a client not so long ago who was really afraid of giving presentations. He was 27 years old. And it was all because when he was about 14, he'd made a small mistake giving a drum recital, and a few people had laughed. And for the rest of that time in between, he'd been afraid of presentations, even though every time he'd done them, they'd gone perfectly. But he was coming with this structure of experience of this is going to happen again, bracing himself and the nerves. And we had one session working on that where I guided him through a particular technique where we went back and we created a new story, a new version of that event. And the
Right.
brain was just like, now believes that this is the brain's like, oh, this is the new story, right? Okay. And his confidence, because I always gauge it, 10 being the best you could feel about this thing, 0 being the opposite. Beginning
Right.
of that session, his confidence was like a 2-3, and he said when he was 14, that's kind of where it had gone down to. At the end of the session, it was right up 7-8, right up in the top. And his body language changed. He was sat upright, he was smiling, and he got on from this very sort of nervous sort of
Yes.
so yeah, but and also, I worked with a 12-year-old boy the other week, where his anxiety was so bad that he couldn't get into school, and within a couple of sessions, he could get back to school, with a smile on his face. And
Very
again,
nice.
it's just figuring out what that trigger was, and I mean that's one way in which I work with people, but that's very common.
And then you would probably have, let's say, another type of client that probably suffered from the same condition you did, or
Yeah.
maybe someone with a serious neurological illness, whether it's epilepsy or Parkinson's, or maybe they suffered a brain tumor and had surgery. They may have some PTSD. You would probably take on clients and do some other techniques within NLP.
Yeah,
That
I
would
mean,
help them.
there's definitely a variety. It's just like and yes, many different techniques. And what I love is that it's not an exact science, and it's very much about, the first conversation is
One-on-one.
about establishing that rapport, figuring out whether their visualization is something that really works for them, or whether they're more conversational. And, Phyllis, we were talking about earlier with the coaching, it's, it's not about, I'm not going to give that person the answers. It's about asking the questions so that they can find out the answers for themselves. And that's so empowering. And so many times I've had clients be like, oh, I just didn't realize that until you said that, and then that can be enough of a shift. But more often than not, it comes down to using the visualization side, and then harnessing that language. And I was just thinking of if I've got time, very quick
Sure.
example of that. I had a client that wasn't sleeping at all, and her language was that she would wake up at 1, 3, and 5 every night, and that there was always this empty glass of water and an empty biscuit tin by the side of the bed. She had lots of other issues and health struggles as well going on. But immediately I was like, you are literally telling yourself, and I'm sure you've had that experience where you set your alarm clock for maybe 8 in the morning, and you're setting it like right 8 o'clock, and you'll wake up at like 1 minute to 8, and then the alarm will go off. I know
Yeah.
I've had that many times. So I said to her, okay, right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete this language of 1, 3, and 5, because it was literally every time. And I did some other work with her as well, and I gave her a recording to help her, like a hypnosis kind of recording to help her sort of drop off.
Right.
And the next day, I heard from her, and she said, I slept through the night. I think she'd woken up once, but she didn't look at the clock, so she didn't know. She'd slept through the night. And it was great because she said, and I woke up and the biscuit tin was full, and so was the glass of water. So, you know, it's just, again, just changing that language of that programming of this is what we're going to do, and that's what happens, to something completely different. So, yeah.
So what other techniques besides language do you find to be within your practice of treating different clients?
Visualization's huge, and I love working with people with them, sort of taking them. I love thinking of it like, or I explain it to clients. So, you know, we've all got those rooms or those attics in our house where it's a bit cluttered. You know, perhaps like there's no energy flowing through. It's a bit stagnant. So I feel like my job is to guide that person to sort of go to a deeper level within their own mind and start to move the furniture around, and
Right.
maybe clear out some clutter, but change things around, shift that furniture, open the windows, get that feng shui going. You know, that's my best way of describing it, because that's how it feels when I do it. So
Right.
it might be something where, you know, somebody's very in a nutshell, but someone's confidence levels are very, very low. So it would be asking them to, when you close your eyes and you sort of connect with that feeling of confidence, do you see anything? What do you feel? Is there a sound? You know, is there a smell? And it might be that, you know, I had a client once where the word confidence came up, and it was tiny, really small, and it was a very, very long way away. And he was quite a young guy, and I think I asked if he was in Star Wars while we were doing this, and I said, okay, right, so now you're gonna start to use that force, and I want you to use that force and bring that to you. And as you bring it towards you, grow that word, make it really nice and big. And we went like quite in depth into it, and it was really good fun. You know, he was just really enjoying it, and he started to, oh, now it's like this color, and now it's really big. And again, as I was watching him, you could see him change. You could see his body language change. The facial expressions change. There was a lightness around him, you know.
Right.
And I think at one point, if I remember rightly, I've done this so many times to people, but it was him. It was wrapped around his head. You know, this confidence was just, and it started off like, you know, very long way in the corner, very, very small, but it
Yeah.
was just so powerful watching him change in front of my eyes as well as this was happening. So yeah, and then, you know, that
The
becomes
piece that I love about this, Alison, is that you're explaining it so clearly, because it's not a matter of think happy thoughts and your life is going to change.
no.
Right.
It's not that. And for anyone who's really done some personal work with the support of a coach or some other, professional, I often equate doing self-awareness work with chewing on glass, which is not exactly the greatest advertisement for the work that I do with folks. Yeah, sign on with me, you're going to chew on glass. But someone was kind enough today to say to me, you made me chew on glass, and then I realized I had diamonds.
Wow, that's
And it
amazing.
took my breath away when this person shared that perspective for me. But it really speaks to, there is work involved here. This is not magical thinking.
Right.
This is not
Yeah.
think happy thoughts. This is not, kumbaya. It's not any of the things that some people might want to label it in order to undermine it and malign it. This is
Right.
work.
Yes.
This is work.
And it's
You do not change the mechanisms of thinking. You do not change the pathways of thinking by doing this and wishing upon a star. It doesn't happen that way. There is a lot of work. It's dedicated work. It's practice work. It's getting it wrong until you get it right, which is why support with coaching is so very, very important. And, Alison, you're changing lives, and the therapeutic value of using your own life experience and wisdom in
Yes.
order now to be of value and support to others. It's just incredible.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, that's what advocacy is all about. But in
Mhm.
this case, sort of like when I started this show, this was me advocating for epilepsy and removing the stigma. now that it's mushroomed into something more of a healthcare ecosystem, we're talking with fellow advocates and using their own case study or their own experience to be able to transfer that knowledge to people who just need direction and guidance. And that's what coaches do. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned as we close our show out in the next segment with how you can get a hold of Alison, as well as some other questions that I've come up with in terms of the types of coaching she's done and the kinds that Phyllis was also comparing, except we're not going to chew glass in the next segment. So stay tuned right here as we're talking about resilience and transformational coaching, which all is in the root of mindfulness, right here on Frank About Health, both on TalkRadio.NYC and Facebook Live. We'll be back in a few. Hey, everybody, and welcome back. It's been an exciting 45 minutes learning a lot about Alison's story and how she is now using her experience to really help others that have a variety of needs to be able to reduce pain, to reduce anxiety, to have more focus and clarity going forward with their lives. Now, I did have one question. When you gave the example of how, Alison, that you were guiding a lot of people through creative visualization, I could see that in the way that you were dealing with the client, I guess you would call him a client, not a patient, is you were still leaving that client to his own devices, his own thinking, his own place, so that there will come a time where he won't be working with you directly anymore. He'll just be in his own bedroom or living room or whatever, and just using the techniques that you've trained so that he can use the visualization and use the proper language to be able to have a different mindset over whatever is creating anxiety or other kinds of issues that he wants to resolve. Correct? You're still leaving the person independent, even though you're coaching them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I very much know from my own experience of doing these techniques that's my environment. And as a coach, I'm just guiding and I'm hinting and I'm going off cues from that person. As you know, like the Star Wars thing, it was like I just had that sense that would resonate, and it did. And then he could just, just happened to, that really worked. And I love that. And you can get really creative. It can be funny. It's all those wonderful things. And yeah, so very much to allow them to, when they can take the lead, but to be there to support and guide when they need that support and guidance. And then absolutely the idea is that they don't need me. I don't want that person with me for the next 10 years needing my coaching, because that means I'm not working as a coach. I'm not being effective. I want them to be like, as soon as they're able to feel like they've got this, they're gone. And then, they can, I got very, very creative. I went like totally off and just started exploring and making up my own techniques that I now use with clients, that I know things that I just discovered randomly that worked for me. And I've got a couple of those that some of my go-tos for working with clients that, so it's very much about empowering that person.
Yeah. I have a question, Alison, around how do you work with someone who's from your perspective a little bit stuck? So I do a lot of work as a coach around emotional intelligence. So the first competency is self-awareness, but the second competency is self-management. So the self-awareness is where you chew the glass. You start to realize there are blind spots, there are habitual behaviors that are no longer serving you, that you're overusing some character strengths, and you're thinking to yourself, at this age and time of my life, how could I be doing this? And it's unsettling. You have to get that person past that regret and remorse towards, well, let's take some positive steps to change that. But so many times my clients have trouble and they get stuck at the self-awareness piece and don't necessarily, they know about the self-management techniques, the empowerment techniques that you were teaching, but they don't necessarily do it, or they don't necessarily capitalize on an opportunity to do it. So what I hear sometimes from clients that are stuck is, I know, I keep doing this. I know. And I'm like, well, the self-awareness is useless if you don't put the self-management with it to change that habitual behavior, change that mindset, change that way of thinking about something. How do you help people get past that point of stuck?
Good question.
Pardon? Sorry?
Good question.
Good question. Yeah, very good question. It's reminds something you said earlier, to do with the chewing glass reminds me of Tony Robbins, who's one of my favorite NLP legends, but he talks about, when you've got a garden full of weeds, you don't just stand there and go, there are no weeds, there are no weeds, there are no weeds. It's it takes the work. So I think very much so when I start working with somebody, it's very much about managing that expectation that this isn't just like a thing that they're just going to do it once and then be fixed. And for me, it was diligently rewiring over a period of a year. It comes back to that thing about it's not an exact science. So it very much depends on the person as to what I felt they needed. And it might be that it's accountability coaching that could come into it. I have a client at the moment who I'm very conscious needs that accountability coaching, whereas other people like myself, it's like I got given the tool. As soon as I saw a little shift, I was like, I'm good. I was doing it 20, 30 times a day without any issues, but it's very much about that person again and what they need. So that's not a question I can say it's this, I can't black and white say that's what I would do. I would gauge that on the person. But I think something like that is probably likely to come down to them needing some kind of accountability, some kind of like that. Again, it's where you don't want somebody to have to keep coming back to you, but there are definite types of people who need that motivation. They need that push, and perhaps it's that could also come down to that confidence that not having that, not being connected into that confidence and resilience that's going to give them that I'm going to take this on, I'm going to do this.
I think you pretty much have named what I use. It's that now we have to have an accountability contract of some sort, or then you're going to fall into that unfortunate category of not being coachable. And we do know that there are folks out there that are not coachable, and that could be such a sad situation, because you agonize over seeing the potential, and for whatever reason they can't see it with you, so that you get through that. So,
and it might be that they need a different kind of, as for this, like,
that's right.
If we feel like we can't help that person, I've yet to have it where I've thought, no, this isn't for me. But I'm sure one day there's going to be. It's knowing when to refer somebody for something else that's going to help them, because it's not about me getting paid. It's about me helping that person. It's about that them getting that result so they don't need me. And if that's not with me because it's not coaching they need, because that's not going to, or perhaps NLP, because perhaps they just don't. If somebody's interested in NLP, I get a lot of people coming for discovery calls with me because they just want to understand what it is. And then it's like, yeah, I can get down with that. Yeah, let's progress. Let's go down that road. Or they might need to go away and I just go on YouTube, learn about it, understand it,
and circle back.
Yeah, because if they're not going to, if they can't, I don't believe it, but it's not going to work because they're not going to do it. And then it's,
I know Frank's going to invite you to share with us how people can get in touch with you and learn more about what you do and your coaching and so forth. But what's on the horizon? What's next for you?
Well, this is my very first radio live interview, so this is very exciting.
But not your last.
Not your last.
No, absolutely, and it's very exciting. I'm starting to do podcasts and give interviews and things like that. But this is very, very exciting for me. I can't even tell you how excited I am to be here. But yes, I mean, for me, it's really just expanding my coaching work, and as again, that's just purpose for me. So it's just seeing where that can take me, the kind of people that I can work with. And I have a few guides that I've written, goal setting guides, things like that. I've got other ideas in the process at the moment, which people can find through my website and my mailing list, all those kinds of things that, so at the moment, I'm just very excited to be able to tell the story. That's the thing that's most important to me. It's my job.
Yeah.
There's no way around that, because if it's not the job, I can't coach. So there's that half to it, but the other half that is the real drive for me is now sharing the story on platforms like this, which is why I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Yes. Because as you said earlier, my LinkedIn header says using my story to help. So
being that we're about at the minute and a half point, I just wanted to say one big takeaway that I've taken from our earlier conversations, in addition to this past hour we've spent together, is that I believe that the type of coaching that you've been able to help yourself with, and in turn coach others with, is helping people learn to live life in the gray area. We have a constant way of thinking, especially here in the US, whether it has to do with COVID or whether it has to do with other issues is still questionable, but it's black or white, all or nothing thinking. And I don't know where it comes from exactly, but I know that in my own personal struggles, professional or otherwise, I've done things like this show to try to bring out the gray area and work with it. And I know from the discussions we've had about how you do the transforming of the neural passageways through NLP, I've noticed that even in just the last 2 weeks, when I have normally anxiety provoking circumstances, I've just been going with the flow because I've been remembering some of the techniques that you've told me that I should just put into my mind to get through the circumstance, because I end up going through the stressful situation with minimal stress, but still a better outcome, you know? So that all being said, ladies and gentlemen, please go to AlisonPetty.com. Please go to her LinkedIn page, which I guess is just under your name, Alison Petty, right?
Yeah, it's all everything. You can find everything through my website, and I always offer, I just put in a free discovery call. So if anybody is interested in just having a conversation with no obligation, if you just want to find out more or talk to me about coaching, you can do that to my website as well. You can book a call with me.
Yes, I looked on your homepage. It says you can actually request an invite to set up time just to have a open dialogue, which, by the way, that's exactly how Alison and I met. So I advise all of you out there to do that. And by the way, yes, you will be able to share this story exponentially. This show is going to be archived immediately on Facebook as we sign off. Simultaneously, I'm going to be able to see that it'll be encored again next week on this network or at random times throughout the weekend. And then it says now, wrap it up. So ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for Friday's shows on TalkRadio.NYC, which are always Friday. Philanthropy in Focus, wise content creates wealth. There'll be another episode of Frank About Health next week, and we're signing off right now. So stay tuned for whatever's next. Signing off. Thanks for being
Alison.
here.
Thanks for being with us.
We'll be in touch. Okay. Bye-bye, Phyllis. Bye.
Bye-bye.